it enough to keep his bid for the White House alive?
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Also tonight, how did Britain end up with a fifth of young children saying they're suffering mental health problems? We hear from one young woman who experienced a crisis at the age of 10. And his last novel explored grief in the aftermath of September 11th. A decade on, Jonathan Safran Foer takes on what it means to be Jewish in America with the story of one family's struggle with identity.
So the Brexit Secretary David Davis has told MPs the government will reject any attempt to undo the referendum vote or delay Britain leaving the EU. With MPs from all parties beginning to rally to a campaign for a Commons vote on the terms of any deal, the line the government is trying to hold is that MPs should have the right to debate and scrutinise the process, but not have any veto on the negotiations. The only vote could come at the end of the entire process. Our political editor Gary Gibbon has this report.
Last week at the Tory conference, those who backed Leave couldn't contain their glee. They'd won the referendum. The Prime Minister was backing their approach to end membership of the single market. Today, that all stirred a Commons uprising. For decades, marginalised anti-EU supporters like David Davis fought lonely battles for Commons votes to frustrate Brussels. Today was Parliament through the looking glass. The old pro-EU establishment rose as one to demand Commons votes to dilute the government's Brexit plans. And the now Brexit Secretary said no chance.
The mandate is clear, and we will reject any attempt to undo the referendum result, any attempt to hold up the process unduly, or any attempt to keep Britain in the EU by the back door by those who didn't like the answer they were given on June 23rd.
But I have to say, he's not making a very good start. In his statement, the Secretary of State says, "We will return sovereignty to the institutions of this United Kingdom." Yet it seems that the government wants to draw up negotiating terms, negotiate and reach a deal without any parliamentary approval. That is not making Parliament sovereign. That is sidelining Parliament.
I'm afraid the honourable gentleman really has to understand the distinction between accountability, and I have a little bit of experience in holding governments to account, difference between accountability and micromanagement, which is what he is trying to do.
I urge him to resist the temptation of advice from a second-rate lawyer who doesn't even understand the parliamentary process.
Brexit supporters know that 475 MPs here backed Remain against only 158 supporting Leave. Remainers repeatedly denied they wanted to use votes in the Commons to overturn the referendum. They said they wanted to be able to be free to interpret it. Theresa May this afternoon visited The Hague on a charm offensive. She met the Dutch Prime Minister. Pro-Remain MPs have been stung into action by Theresa May's speech a week ago, pretty much ruling out full membership of the single market. She feels that's probably the only route open if Britain wants to control EU migration. They don't want to give up on the economic benefits of full single market membership.
Could he tell us, on the basis of what constitutional principle does he believe that the Prime Minister can now arrogate to herself the exclusive right to interpret what Brexit means?
There is a danger that this government is appearing to be turning its back on the single market and not valuing the real benefit of migrant workers.
Earlier, Theresa May was in Copenhagen visiting the Danish Prime Minister. EU capitals think Mrs May wants to know their bargaining positions and bottom lines ahead of formal talks starting next year. One EU diplomat said she's on a fishing expedition, but she'll catch no fish.
Well, Gary Gibbon joins us live now from the House of Commons. Gary, are you clear now whether, well, the Commons will ever get a vote on Brexit?
There are pretty strong indications that they might get something a long way down the line. They want something a lot sooner, those that want this vote, and they want it because they think the position is galvanising in government, a position outlined by Theresa May in her speech a week last Sunday to the Tory conference, whereby Britain does come out of full membership of the single market. They want to head that off before it gets absolutely cemented into being the British position. And you sense today probably for the first time, it's 108 days since the referendum, probably for the first time in the Commons, a moment when there really was a coming together of the forces on the Remain side to try to dilute what they see as too radical, too drastic a separation from Europe. They want to be a bit closer, and an awful lot of people on the other side say a break is a break. You've actually got to get out of the institutions.
How much of a threat is this cross-party group of questioning MPs to the government?
Well, it's newly formed. It's not really formed in the sense of having meetings and the rest of it that all of them come along to. The really important thing to remember here is some of the percentages involved, the numbers. 73% of MPs actually voted for Remain, but 73% of constituencies in England and Wales, according to number crunchers who've tried to look at this, 73% of constituencies in England and Wales actually voted to leave. So you've got mirror images of two things going on there, a real tension. Now, the Remainers here feel they've been given a bit of a push by noises from the Treasury suggesting that perhaps lonely department in government is trying to pull Theresa May a certain way, CBI and other people as well. At the moment they want to join in, but nobody knows how this story ends.
Well, now we are joined here in the studio by two men who are both former leaders of their parties. Labour's Ed Miliband, who called for a Commons vote on the terms of any Brexit deal, and Ian Duncan Smith, former Conservative Party leader and a leading figure in the successful vote Leave campaign. Well, the referendum has decided we're going to leave Europe. That seems to be agreed. What is Parliament's formal role in the terms of that departure?
Well, I think, of course, the government is bound to come back to Parliament and to tell Parliament what it's doing, how that's working, and that will happen over a period of time. I would certainly insist that the government does that. But the second part of it, which is the government was not expected to do, if you remember, during the conference, Theresa May announced out that they're actually also, in parallel, going to repeal the 1972 European Communities Act. Now, strictly speaking, according to Article 50, you don't need to do this, but it is bound by our own constitutional requirements. And so that means everything that will be discussed in the Article 50 process will be in Parliament, in detail, going through both houses of Parliament. So this will be the focus for Parliament to discuss every aspect, including things like entry and staying into the single market if they wish in there. So that Parliament's views will be considered and taken throughout that. I encourage that, and I asked for that in this pamphlet I wrote.
Satisfied?
Not really. Look, this is a matter for the national interest, really. I accept that there was a vote to leave the European Union, and I think we should honour that mandate. And I think we should get away from the idea that somehow people who are worried about this are seeking to reverse the result. But there's clearly a wide spectrum of what Brexit looks like, and there is no mandate, either from the Conservative Party manifesto of 2015 or the referendum, for the type of Brexit we have. So it seems to me unarguable, and actually in the national interest and building the national consensus the government say they want, to have Parliament consulted and indeed approve the terms of the negotiations. And I am worried that there'll be a drive to hard Brexit pushed by some people in the government, and I'm sure some people in government are worried about that, without Parliament having a role. And then it'll be a fait accompli at the end of the negotiations.
Well, I mean, what's your response to that?
Well, first of all, I don't believe in hard or soft Brexit. I think the truth is...
so hard Brexit is not an issue for you?
Well, no, I don't soft or either hard. I mean, the truth is, what the government has to do in Article 50, there are two processes running in Article 50. The first is a very functional process of how do you leave the organisation, do you tidy up issues on home affairs, bits and pieces that you may wish to be part of. The second aspect is what kind of relationship does the EU have with the UK after you leave the European Union? And you want that one to run in parallel, and you want that to be established as quickly as possible. Now, the key point about all of that...
But all this is going to be done without referring to Parliament?
Well, no, I think the truth is all of this will come back into Parliament endlessly in the course of
I see, so Parliament will get a vote on the single market, for example?
Yeah, because inside the 72 Act, the repeal of that are all the provisions to be members of the single market.
Let's check about this.
So hang on, this is going to be a very long...
I mean, look, that is I know Ian said to me before he came on...
Is that going to cover what you need?
I fear it isn't. I mean, Ian said beforehand he doesn't speak for the government. But look, if you're saying, Ian, that we are going to get a vote on the single market and whether we're members of the single market, I mean, that's good news. That is definitely a step forward.
Well, that is a major news event. Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying?
You have been in Parliament as long as I have. You know that if you repeal an act like the 72 European European Communities Act, which has everything that we are bound to under European law.
And you'll accept
and all of those regulations are in there. All those votes are there.
And you'll accept that the issue of the single market
all of that
will be
there.
debated and voted upon by MPs.
But that's what the 72 Act says. And there's one other element, which, by the way, the Labour Party could, any day they like, they can hold an opposition day debate on membership of the single European market. They could do it. They're doing it on Wednesday, I gather. They can do it again and again and again.
You've got nothing to worry about.
And you can have a vote on it too.
You know that opposition days aren't the same as government coming to Parliament. But there's
if you
pressure on
defeat
your
the
side,
government,
but there's pressure on your side not to vote
but
for an
if you
opposition.
defeat the government,
Ian, let me ask you.
Come on, I've rebelled in the past.
Let me ask you this
I've put a bit of pressure on him, Ed. Let's just ask you a question. Are you actually clear on what Labour's position on the single market,
I don't
freedom
speak
of
for the
movement?
front bench, but let me tell you what my position is. My position is that we should do everything we can to stay in the single market, and we should also, if we can, seek adjustments to freedom of movement. Now,
is that okay with you?
Now, some people,
is that okay with you?
say some people say that's impossible. I think that would be the ideal outcome.
Okay.
At the moment, the government's position is we've got a target on immigration which we're going to meet, which is unrealistic and will do damage to our economy. And never mind what happens to the single market. Never mind what happens to the economy. That's why you've got a coalition of Labour MPs, Tory MPs, the CBI, who I don't always agree with, Japanese investors, all these people saying, we are really worried by this charge to hard Brexit. The question I want to ask Ian, if I may, is this.
Well, I thought
Ian,
I was going to ask this question.
you understand the need to bring the country together, Remainers and Leavers.
Yeah.
I accept the result. I accept there was a vote for Brexit. But without the government properly consulting Parliament, properly laying the trade-offs before people, I don't see how you get that national consensus, that unity of the country that we need.
Look, the public voted quite clearly and on this to leave the European Union. Now, one of the key areas was to take back control of their borders. Now, I happen to believe that the best way to do that is to have a permit system that allows you to bear down on low-skilled workers, but to allow utter flexibility for high-end, high-skilled workers. Now, if that's in place, we will not be able to remain members of the Single European Act. Hang on, Mrs. Merkel has said so. The European Commission
what about the trade-offs here? What does that mean for our economy?
Can I just finish? You ask me a question.
Sure.
The key element of this is not about being in an internal market of the EU. The question is, we want to leave and have full access to that, and so do they to us. And this is really the point. We want to have a free trade relationship.
That's what
with
you
them.
want to have.
Yeah, and they do too. And I believe this is the point about discussion. When you get down to it, it's about access, free trade.
Can I bring out the difference between us, John?
I think we can see the differences. They're pretty clear. But I do want to ask you about the pound. The pound is almost at parity with the euro. It's heading for parity with the dollar. Are you excited by that? Is that exactly what you wanted?
I actually think the pound was way overvalued before. If you talk to the CBI, one of the great
So you wanted it down at this level?
CBI wanted it down.
You wanted it down at this level?
And look what's happened to manufacturing as a result.
I wonder why the CBI then want us to return to something in terms of agreeing to a single market.
Well, the CBI asked for a lower pound, and they've got it. And we're now 12% more competitive in the European Union than we were before.
And
the
goods that we're bringing in are more expensive.
And yeah, but hang on a second. There is no inflationary pressure at the moment. The Bank of England has said so. We have massive levels of money floating around. This is a very good time for us to be able to use that lower pound to improve our exports.
Are you
That's what's
equally
happening at the
excited
moment.
by the pound?
I'm not, because we're poorer as a result.
We're not poorer, Ed.
Well, of course we're poorer. People going on holiday will find that they're poorer and we're poorer
Can I
as a
just say
country.
to you, Ed, you and others have all said that the great guardian of this will be, how do you measure this? You measure it by what happens to the FTSE 100, the FTSE 250.
I've never said that.
Yeah, they have. And they all said this is the thing, and it has risen to levels
let me-
higher
Okay,
than
I'm going to ask you two final
Business
questions. So they're
confidence is
about
very
people
high.
in the Commons. I want to ask you first about the second-rate lawyer that you described the Shadow Attorney
neat,
General as
legal
being.
advice, actually.
Yeah, well, as it happens, he's the Shadow Brexit Secretary. And as it happens, he was the Director of Public Prosecutions, and he was probably the star lawyer of his generation. Who are you, a non-lawyer, to describe him as a second-rate lawyer?
I talked about the second-rate legal advice, and I stand by that. The reality...
No, you called him a second-rate lawyer.
Advice is very simple.
Did you or did you
Hang on,
not
John.
call him a
The
second-rate
advice
lawyer?
is about whether Parliament has the right to vote and whether they can declare
the
they have
record
right
will
to vote.
show that you
And that
called
is very
him
where
a
it is. And
second-rate
I'm not
lawyer.
rallying from it.
And
I
the
absolutely
question
believe
I want to
this is
ask
bad
you
advice.
is, do you have confidence of Jeremy Corbyn and his leadership in this specific matter of Europe?
Yes.
We don't really know where he stands on it.
Well, I think Keir Starmer, who I think has made an excellent start as Shadow Brexit Secretary, set that out on television
I saw no nods
yesterday.
from Mr. Corbyn.
You saw no what?
I watched it carefully. I saw no nods.
I think that is criminology of the most extreme kind, John, when we have big questions to discuss about the future of our economy and our place in the world.
Ed Miliband on that note, and Ian Duncan-Smith, thank you both very warmly for coming in. Fatima.
Thank you, John. Now, Donald Trump has hit back at both Hillary and Bill Clinton in the second presidential debate after coming under fire over those offensive comments about women. And when Trump fights, he gets down and dirty. His performance seems to have done enough to head off the immediate crisis, but will it stop the flow of senior Republicans withdrawing their endorsements from him? Kylie Morris is in St. Louis, Missouri, where the debate took place. Kylie.
Fatima, it was nasty, it was brutal, it was uncomfortable to watch. Donald Trump went into this debate having to explain this very kind of lecherous video recording that only came out on Friday. And then he paraded in women who had previously accused Bill Clinton of sexual abuse and sat them in that room. It was an extreme measure. But perhaps to explain that, I should just draw your attention to an NBC poll that has been released. It was measured from just after that video recording was released, and it put Hillary Clinton 11 points ahead of Donald Trump. That is a serious lead at this stage in the campaign. So he really did get down and dirty indeed. As well as that, he's got a Republican rebellion on his hands with people like Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, basically saying to candidates who are running for re-election, look, save yourselves. Don't feel like you have to be loyal to Donald Trump. Simply run a good conservative race and hopefully you'll win. We'll have more on that in a moment, but first, the debate last night. And I should just say it does include excerpts from that video recording, so there is strong language of a sexual nature.
They couldn't even bring themselves to shake hands. The two candidates stood alongside one another uncomfortably, bracing for what would be a breathtakingly nasty beginning to a torturous hour and a half of mutual evisceration. In the audience for Hillary Clinton, husband Bill, daughter Chelsea, Donald Trump's wife and family, and their special guests. Three women who accuse Hillary Clinton of victimizing them after they say they were sexually assaulted by her husband. To get things started, a direct question to Donald Trump about a lecherous decade-old recording that has forced a Republican revolt against his candidacy.
And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Whatever you want. Grab them by the can do anything.
This was locker room talk. I'm not proud of it. I apologize to my family. I apologize to the American people. Certainly I'm not proud of it, but this is locker room talk. You know, when we have a world where you have ISIS chopping off heads.
It was an ambitious pivot from lewd bragging about sexual assault to the evils of ISIS.
And it's one of those things. I will knock the hell out of ISIS.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Trump.
that's what I want to talk about.
Secretary Clinton, do you want to respond?
What we all saw and heard on Friday was Donald talking about women, what he thinks about women, what he does to women. And he has said that the video doesn't represent who he is. But I think it's clear to anyone who heard it that it represents exactly who he is.
But Donald Trump divined now was the time to show exactly who Hillary Clinton is, by way of her husband, smearing her by association with what he called Bill Clinton's history of sexual abuse.
Far worse. Mine are words and his was action. Hillary Clinton attacked those same women and attacked them viciously. 4 of them here tonight. When Hillary brings up a point like that and she talks about words that I said 11 years ago, I think it's disgraceful, and I think she should be ashamed of herself, if you want to know the truth.
A pause, a wry look at those applauding in the audience, and smile.
When I hear something like that, I am reminded of what my friend Michelle Obama advised us all. When they go low, you go high.
Clinton never directly addressed Trump's accusations against her and Bill. But as the debate turned to the fracas over her emails, Trump seized the moment, threatening to throw her into prison if he wins.
I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation, because there has never been so many lies, so much deception. You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Secretary Clinton, I want to
Martha,
follow up on that. I'm going to let you
just
talk
quickly
about
say,
emails.
because everything he just said is absolutely false, but I'm not surprised. It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
As the audience began to ask their questions, Trump began moving around the stage, looming over Clinton, interrupting her, appearing to deliberately crowd her space. Meanwhile, in the Twitter sphere, a former chairman of the Republican Party, also known as the GOP, was sending the world this. But for Republicans hoping beyond hope that Trump could save this, well, he kind of did. Listen to this tirade against Clinton, who seemed increasingly diminished in her answers.
For 30 years she's been doing this, Anderson. I say it all the time. She talks about health care. Why didn't she do something about it? She talks about taxes. Why didn't she do something about it? She doesn't do anything about anything other than talk.
Breaking with spin room tradition, it wasn't the candidates who appeared in the corral to be quizzed by the press after the debate. The Trump campaign sent out the accusers of Bill and Hillary Clinton.
He's a big man, and he touched me.
Nearly 20 years ago, Kathleen Willey alleged then-President Bill Clinton sexually assaulted her. He denied the allegations, and an independent prosecutor found insufficient evidence to proceed. Last night, she was back to accuse the Clintons again.
Hillary Clinton is a fake feminist, a champion of women, an advocate of women, does not attack victims of sexual assault, rape, or sexual harassment like she has.
Some people might feel concerned that you're being used by the Trump campaign. What would you say to them?
Not at all. If I felt that way, I wouldn't be here.
Over on the other side of the room, it was a struggle for Trump surrogates to take the high ground on policy.
It was incredibly important today for him to get to policy. And I think if we get to policy, if we get to the macro issues of security and prosperity, I think we win.
How is he getting beyond it? By sending into the room, first thing tonight, 3 women who say that they've been sexually abused by Bill Clinton and who have been shunned by Hillary Clinton. How is that lifting our eyes to policy?
I'm not sure it was the smartest tactic, to be perfectly frank. I'm not sure. I'm not saying it was a mistake, but I'm not sure it would have been my tactic.
What about his move bringing those women into the audience tonight?
He engages in sideshows and antics. That's his business. That's his life. That's not what people want in a president of the United States. We stay focused on the issues. Hillary Clinton stayed focused on the issues tonight. It's why she won the debate.
If you were an effective senator, you could have done it.
It's not clear who won the debate, but America may well have lost. The candidates clashed over Russia and Syria, as well as taxation policy, but this will be remembered for sex, lies, and videotape.
Biggest tax cuts they've ever had.
Okay, I'm joined now by Stacey Washington, who's a conservative radio show host. What's the show called, Stacey? Stacey on the right. And Chris Arps, who is a Republican strategist. Stacey, to start with you, you're a Trump supporter. Did he do well last night? Did he do enough?
I think he did a great job. One of the things that I was concerned about was how he was going to handle the questions about the comments from 11 years ago, and if he would sound contrite, and if he would be able to pivot from that to hitting Hillary on some issues that she's not been addressed. And he did so very well, I thought.
Did you understand he quickly started talking about ISIS when he was trying to defend those comments? I didn't really understand that.
Well, I think what he was saying is, you know, and maybe not as artfully as he could have, he was trying to say that there are some things that are so much more important than what he said 11 years ago. He did sound as if he was extraordinarily embarrassed by it, and he apologized again, and then he pivoted to ISIS.
Chris, did he do enough for you? You used to indeed work for the Cruz campaign. Right. Did he do enough to win your support last night?
He did not win my support last night. What I think he did was he kind of stopped the bleeding and stopped the defections from the Republican House members, but I'm not so sure that he convinced the soccer moms and the fence-sitting moderates and independents to support him.
What could he have done? What did you want to hear from him that you didn't hear?
Well, for me personally, I'd like to see him get away from kind of the tawdry stuff and talk about what he's going to do for the country. Talk about Barack Obama, who's been president for 7 years and has never had an economy grow over 3%. Talk about the foreign policy in Syria and all the problems over there. I'd like to see him focus on that instead of some of the tabloid issues.
Did the stunt of bringing the women in, the accusers of Bill Clinton, did that work for you? How did you feel? I mean, you mentioned the word tawdry.
Right. No, it didn't work for me, but, you know, Donald Trump is a showman, and I think it got him great headlines today.
Stacey, it's kind of nasty, isn't it? Aren't we into a deeply nasty stage when you bring in accusers? You know, there were women there who were, well, certainly one of the women was raped when she was 14 years old, not
12.
by Bill Clinton, sorry, 12 years
Yeah,
old.
but Hillary defended her.
But to bring that person in as part of a kind of a political showcase just feels indefensible, doesn't it?
Well, I don't think it's indefensible. One of the things that Donald Trump is doing in this campaign is he's bringing a sense of reality to something that's previously been above and beyond Americans. One thing that I hate is how Republicans have stood back and allowed Barack Obama to run our country into the ground. They haven't given him any
Barack Obama
resistance.
wasn't even mentioned on stage last night.
I know, but to finish that point, of course, what he did last night wasn't the normal course of business, but to me it shows he's willing to fight for us, the regular people, the Midwesterners, the ones who are forgotten.
Is he willing to fight for women, though? I mean, those comments from 11 years ago, they are lecherous. They are really disagreeable.
I'll never defend those comments, but what I will say is it more important what he said 11 years ago or what Hillary Clinton did just 6 months ago, a year ago, last year, while she was Secretary of State, while she was being paid by taxpayers? I think Donald Trump has a little more room to go with me. And with a lot of Americans, his support's not going down among those of us who are already for him.
But he's got to win over new, as you mentioned, the soccer mums. You know, he's got to win over new voters. He's got to win over moderates. What do you think about the, I mean, there was an attempt to move toward foreign policy, to talk about Syria, to talk about Russia. What more does he need to do to persuade Republicans like you, forget the moderate, Republicans who are not even mentioning him in their own campaigns, to come back?
Well, I think the main thing is we just want someone that we don't feel that's going to embarrass us, and that's someone that when I go on TV or radio and talk about him, that I don't necessarily feel embarrassed about defending him. I want him to stick to the issues, stick to what Barack Obama has done the last 8 years with Clinton and her foreign policy. I think if he sticks to those issues, that he can bring the fence sitters and Republican moderates and independents to his side. I don't think it's over for him yet. I'm asking Donald Trump to give me a reason to vote for you. I'm not a never Trumper, but you know, I'm on the fence right now.
A plea from Donald Trump to give Republicans a reason to support him.
Please.
Goodness me. Okay, thank you very much. Chris Huff, Stacey Washington. That's all from us in St. Louis. Now it's back to you in London.
Kylie, thank you. A 23-year-old Nigerian student has been sent to Broadmoor Hospital indefinitely after stabbing to death a random stranger on the streets of London last December. But Femi Nandab had been arrested 7 months earlier for possessing a knife and attacking a police officer. And the victim's widow today called for an inquiry into why the mental health and legal systems had failed to protect the public in this and similar cases. Kamian Zeram has this report.
Yaron Ensink had just become a father last Christmas when he was stabbed to death by a man with a history of mental health problems. Outside the Old Bailey today, his widow, now a single mother, grieves.
Jeroen was everyone's friend, but he was my soulmate. And I'm so proud to be married to Jeroen and for Fleur to have such a remarkable father. My life stopped on the 29th of December. It's only by looking at Fleur that I know that time is passing.
29th of December last year, Femi Nandab had recently had assault charges against him dropped for attacking a policeman and possessing a knife. But he was suffering cannabis psychosis. He stabbed Mr. Ensink in broad daylight as he was on his way to post new baby girl cards to his family. Their daughter, Fleur, was 10 days old.
My big question from the very beginning is, how could this have ever happened? If someone who's so mentally unfit, how could they be allowed to be at liberty? This should never have happened. Somewhere along the line, in my opinion, there is a failing.
Mr. Ensink had survived a plane crash back in 2008 and spoke to Channel 4 News about the landing.
It was very rough, and the oxygen mask came down, neon lights splashed on the floor.
Tonight there are calls for an inquiry, not just into Mr. Ensink's killer, but the wider mental health system, and a worrying recent rise in suicide too.
Jeroen joins the 100 or so people who are killed in Britain every year by people with severe mental illness. They're often people who are unwilling or unable to access the care and treatment they need.
For all the homicides, there are many, many more suicides of people whose mental health condition is not being treated properly, who've gone begging for help, have been turned away because there aren't sufficient beds available, and they've been left to manage under community teams which are overstretched.
A new father whose daughter will never know him, whose wife wants lessons to be learned, because her own instinct's death could so easily have been avoided.
Came Zerum. German police have arrested a Syrian man suspected of planning a bomb attack. After a 2-day manhunt, Jaber al-Bakr was arrested in Leipzig. He was caught after 1.5 kilograms of powerful explosives were seized from his flat. He's thought to have links to the Islamic State group, and German police say he had been on their radar since last month. Mr. al-Bakr sought help from another Syrian who alerted police.
Now, a growing number of increasingly young children are suffering from some form of mental health issue. On World Mental Health Day, the children's charity Place to Be says that almost 3/4 of those it counsels show signs of anxiety, while over half are depressed or withdrawn. In the latest of our No Go Britain series, our reporter is Jess Naisbitt, who hit crisis point while at primary school when she was just 10. She tells us how she fought her way back to health and explores the everyday worries that are getting children down.
It was just like a chain of thoughts that made my body just become so unwell. It hurt for people to touch my skin. I couldn't eat and I couldn't walk. I ended up going to hospital. I don't know, it was just scary really, because I didn't know what was wrong, but I just knew that I never felt right. I'm 14 now, but I was 10 years old and still at primary school when I hit crisis point. Walking to school I used to go dead slow because what if I get picked on, what if none of my friends are there, what if I'm on my own all day? So all the thoughts used to just roll on in just like a minute, and I used to think of all the worst situations. If a teacher asked me a question, like my heart would go like dead fluttery, and like my hands would start to sweat and I'd start to go bright red, and like I couldn't say anything. I was just like stuck, like freaking out. Because you can't see what's really going on the inside, it took a long time to be taken seriously, and eventually I became so poorly I couldn't even leave the house. No one could touch me because that would hurt. I was in a wheelchair for a while, and I couldn't eat, and like this all stemmed from anxiety. So like even though it is in your head, well, not like it is in your mind and you can't see it, it does affect loads of other physical things. Mental health might be invisible, but it's no joke. There are lots of children just like me struggling with their worries. In fact, a charity that does counselling in primary schools say that more than half the kids referred to them are depressed, and almost 3/4 show signs of anxiety. Miss Bruce has been at Cubitt Town Junior School for over 20 years, and she's seen a big increase in children struggling with their mental health.
I think we've noticed in the last 5 years mainly, but probably 10 years before that, there's been a bit of decline in children's mental health or well-being. More so children falling into depression really, really early, anxiety about exams, about academic, about family matters. We've seen behaviour disruption disorders, more ADHD that is coming in, but children that tend to just be more aware of what's happening in the world and very, very unhappy, and they're coming into school with all these things behind them and having to just be children.
Here the children are given diaries in which they can record their emotions so teachers can spot things early. Everyday worries are found in every classroom.
When I'm worried, my heart pounds really fast and sometimes I stutter and my hands get sweaty. I just want it to get over it. I don't know how to really describe this, but you get butterflies in your stomach and you feel sick. You feel like you're gonna faint and you don't know what's gonna go on after that moment. So it's difficult to describe.
Well, when I get worried, I just feel this, just beating in my head, pounding and saying, you can't do it, you can't do it. And I'm like, I think I can beat it.
But talking about how you feel is always difficult.
I normally talk to my mum or my hamster.
Me talking to my stuffed animals, for instance. It's sort of embarrassing me saying this, but I speak to them because I know they wouldn't judge me or make me feel worse than I already was.
In the public eye, and a lot of the work that's done, it's done in secondary schools. And I think they've always seen mental health issues as being a secondary school problem. But I think it's happening younger and younger and younger. And I think that is the issue.
Miss Bruce isn't alone. 55% of head teachers report a large rise in pupils with anxiety and stress. This is my mum. She's a teacher too. Because of what happened to me, she knows how important it is that even in primary schools, children know how to manage their worries before they get out of control.
Well, let's start our lesson with a practice. So let's start with finger breathing. Okay, so coming to sit well, so feeling your feet on the floor and your bottom on the chair. And then when you're ready, bringing your attention now to the breath in the body and bringing your finger to the bottom of the thumb. And as you breathe in, just tracing your finger up the thumb. And as you breathe out, trace it down.
Mum teaches a 6-week mindfulness in schools curriculum to children from the age of 7. It teaches them about their brains, minds and how their thoughts work.
And when you're ready, gently opening your eyes.
Going back to what happened to me, Mum remembers how difficult it was to find the right help.
I was just desperate for anything to help and to support us. And there just was no help, so it was hard.
Eventually, I went to hospital and received the right medical treatment, cognitive behavioural therapy and the support I needed. It was then about learning how to manage things going forward. If my anxiety came, I can now just feel my feet on the floor and just breathe and feel my breath and feel right, I'm all right, there's nothing wrong. And my worrying thoughts aren't facts, they're just thoughts. With the rise in the number of young people suffering with anxiety and evidence that the problem is affecting younger and younger children, we need to wake up and ensure services and support reach children before things get too bad. It's really nothing to be ashamed about. I'm fine to tell anyone about it. I'm quite proud of where I've come from to where I am now, so I can show people if they are going through things and stuff like that, it does get better, that there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, joining me now is Jess, who you saw in that report with her mum Emma, and Dr. Fiona Pienaar from the children's mental health charity Place to Be. So Jess, first of all, when you realised something was happening, how difficult was it to express that and tell someone?
Well, it was really scary because I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that I just didn't feel right, and it was hard not to just focus on the physical things because I had horrid thoughts in my mind, and I couldn't tell them from the facts to the actual thoughts. So now that I can, it's dead good, but yeah.
Did it take a while for you to say to Mum, I think something's wrong?
Yeah, it did, because I had all these physical symptoms, so we just focused on them because they're easier to focus on than the actual mind. I didn't know what was going on in my mind, I just knew that I wasn't right.
So Emma, when Jess came to you and said, I'm having these problems, how quickly did you realise this is serious?
Well, we knew it was serious, not because Jessica didn't voice
that she was having difficulties with thoughts, emotions. And like Jessica said, the symptoms that presented were very physical. There were signs, but I didn't spot those signs, those early warning signs, until it got to such a point where you couldn't ignore it. So when I would say to Jessica, we'll go out somewhere, then it was that was basically like me telling Jessica she was going to come and face a saber-toothed tiger. So I didn't understand the mood swings, the reluctance, the tears, the real challenges just to leave the house. So
when you tried to get help from mental health services, what was that process like? Was it difficult?
It was really difficult because she was very, very unwell, and as I said, physically, and that was all that was focused on. And no, the doctors initially, when she was admitted to hospital numerous times by GPs because she was so unwell, never once suggested that perhaps this was some mental health problem as well alongside it.
So, Dr. Pina, how have we ended up in this situation where so many young people, children, are now experiencing these mental health issues?
I think it's a far more stressful world than we live in, even 5-10 years ago. There's a lot of pressure on children and young people around academics. We have young children worrying about what they're going to be and what they're going to do when they grow up. I think it's a much faster-paced world, and they see their parents and their teachers very busy. And then, of course, there's the online environment as well, which can be 24/7 for young people.
So what you're saying is you'd like to see some sort of early intervention so that it doesn't get as bad as it did for Jess, but it's spotted early. How would that be done?
Well, I think it's a range of approaches, really. We'd like to see teachers having more training around recognising signs, whether that's a young person withdraws or is more aggressive or more boisterous, just that they can recognise those signs that there's a change happening.
Is this about a cut in services? Is it a question of funding?
Well, I think my organisation, Place to Be, we've spoken out before and said we think government needs to invest more in training of teachers, more in mental health services for children and young people, and that means statutory services, so the more specialised services, as well as early intervention. So having a professional in each school would be the best.
And Jess, very quickly, just lastly, have you got any advice for any young people watching who might feel a bit like you do, or you did?
Yeah, well, I would say to just it's gonna be okay. So just talk to someone about it, let all your emotions out and just say how you feel, because they can help and it will get better.
Thank you so much for coming in, Jess, and your mum Emma, and to Dr. Fiona Pina. John.
And if you're affected by any of the issues we've been discussing, do go to channel4.com/support. After the break, his first 2 novels were made into Hollywood films.
Listen to me, I'm gonna be home in about 20 minutes.
So you listen to me. We broke our window to let in
But
some
it's
air.
been more than a decade since Jonathan Safran Foer's last effort. So what can we expect from his new offering?
Now, while still in his 20s, Jonathan Safran Foer wrote 2 critically acclaimed novels. Everything is illuminated and extremely loud and incredibly close, both of which were turned into films.
Are you there? Are you there?
That second novel was set to the backdrop of 9/11 and a son dealing with the death of his father. The story set him up as his generation's chronicler of America, drawing comparisons to Don DeLillo and Philip Roth. But that was more than 10 years ago. Now he's finally followed up with a third, Here I Am, described as a novel about the claims of identity, history, family, and the burdens of a broken world. He's visiting Britain at the moment, so we invited him into the studio to talk about all of that and, of course, the state of US politics. But I began by asking him whether his latest book is a depiction of family, his depiction of family and a messy life were reflective of his own.
I have an extremely messy life, but I've never met anyone who doesn't. In fact, it might not be the worst description for what family life is. It's the thing that's most messy. And I love that description of the book. That's exactly how I think about it.
There's been a lot of chat about cultural appropriation and whether novelists should write about experiences that aren't their own. You're writing what you know. Where do you stand on that broader debate?
At times I'm writing what I know, and at times I'm not writing what I know. Often I don't know if I know what I'm writing about, or it's only revealed to me later. W.H. Auden said I look at what I write so that I can see what I think. I didn't start the book with ideas and then try to express them or encode them. In the process of writing, I encountered myself and my ideas.
Do you think there's a generational divide in terms of American Jewish identity?
I think that any kind of identity, for any kind of identity, there are generational divides in British identity, in American identity, in identity as a Democrat or Republican, and certainly in Jewish identity. And in Jewish identity, it might even be more, or it's particularly extreme, because each generation has had such a different and specific experience.
What makes it extreme, would you say?
Well, my grandmother, every member of her family was murdered. You know, my mother was born in a DP camp and came to the United States. I have those people as my, parents and grandparents, and yet have a kind of fully assimilated life in America.
And thinking about anti-Semitism, some people say when they criticize Israel, they're being anti-Zionist and not anti-Semitic. Do you see a distinction between those two terms?
In terms of the conflation of being anti-Israel and anti-Jew, that is a mistake. One is perfectly capable of criticizing the practices of Israel without making any kind of broader statement about Jewish people. I am a Jew, and I am often critical of the actions of Israel, just as I am an American, and I am often critical of the actions of America.
And as someone who chronicles American life, perhaps, what do you make of what's happening politically?
It's very hard to make sense of. On the one hand, we have, one of the most experienced and capable presidential candidates ever, and then this sentient hemorrhoid, basically, who is a demagogue and brings nothing of substance or even interest anymore to the national debate.
You're not mincing your words on Trump, but he does have support, though, doesn't he? What do you put that down to?
Well, we have a two-party system, so a huge number of voters are automatically going to be in either one of the parties.
But he seems to be tapping into something else, isn't he? A sort of anti-politics moment.
I think he was tapping into something else when he was still easy to be misunderstood. He was tapping into a frustration, which is real and which is not to be dismissed and not to be belittled. But he is not a spokesperson for the solution to that frustration. He was just an embodiment of that frustration.
And how does America move on from this after the election in terms of the actual polarization, in terms of that very raw frustration people are feeling?
Every election in America is polarizing. We haven't had a landslide in an awfully long time, and we continue to function. And, it's one of the things that is most wonderful about American democracy is that in every historical moment, at least up until now, you can have, two parties butting heads, two sets of values, conflicting in ways that can approach something almost violent rhetorically, and then a president is elected, and the next day everybody respects that president, and we get on with never passing any laws.
I mean, you say up until now, is this the moment that it all changes?
I think Trump's rhetoric is different, especially when he talks about how the election is rigged. That's something we've never, ever heard before, and it's planting ideas that are extremely dangerous. But for them to be dangerous, he has to be taken seriously, and I don't think he's taken seriously anymore.
So you don't seem particularly worried about Trump then?
No, I'm extremely worried.
But what I mean is, you seem to think that the election is over pretty much.
Yeah, but I also thought Brexit wouldn't pass, and I also thought the peace treaty in Colombia would, so we're proven wrong all the time. And
so you're not putting money on anything?
Let me put it this way. I will volunteer at phone banks in the week before the election, not because phone banks are a fun place to hang out, but because I think it's the right thing to do to take it seriously enough to work.
Jonathan Safran-Foer, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Tonight's main news, the government has made it clear that it will not allow MPs to vote on its strategy in negotiations to leave the European Union. A cross-party group of MPs is seeking to vote to head off moves to trade off immigration controls for a loss of access to the single market.
We'll be back tomorrow at 7.
But for now, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.
Good evening.